The heavy glass door of the downtown high-rise clicks shut. Behind it sits a man in a $3,000 tailored suit, holding a framed piece of paper that cost him exactly $180,000. His name is Julian. Julian is a doctor. Not the kind that saves lives in an emergency room, but the kind that writes 60-page dissertations on market volatility. He is 34 years old. He has the vocabulary of a scholar, the intellect of a prodigy, and the bank account of a frightened teenager. Right now, Julian is staring at his phone. He isn't checking his stock portfolio. He's looking at his student loan servicer app. The balance hasn't moved in 3 years. The interest capitalizes faster than his prestigious corporate salary can dent it. He takes a deep breath, straightens his silk tie, and walks into the boardroom to pitch a quarterly strategy to the man who owns the building. The man sitting at the head of the mahogany table is named Marcus. Marcus doesn't own a suit. He is wearing a faded black cotton shirt and a diver's watch with a scratched bezel. Marcus dropped out of a state business school at 19 because he realized that paying a professor to read from a textbook wasn't going to teach him how to structure a leveraged buyout. Today, Julian works for Marcus. The PhD is an employee. The dropout is the institution. You have been lied to since the day you could hold a pencil. The modern education system is not an elevator to wealth. It is a luxury assembly line designed to mass-produce highly efficient, deeply indebted workers who are psychologically terrified of failure. The system doesn't teach you how to build the machine. It teaches you how to be the smartest, most compliant cog inside of it. Julian looks at Marcus and feels a burning sense of injustice. Julian read the books. Julian passed the exams. Julian stayed up until 4 in the morning defending his thesis to a panel of tenured academics who haven't operated a real business in their entire lives. He did everything right. Society promised him that his pedigree would guarantee superiority. But society left out the mathematical reality of leverage. When Julian looks at the financial projections on the screen, he sees complex data models and standard deviations. He sees theory. When Marcus looks at the exact same screen, he sees cash flow, risk mitigation, and equity. Julian spent his 20s acquiring theoretical liabilities, taking out 6-figure government loans to buy the right to put 3 letters next to his name. Marcus spent his 20s acquiring actual assets. He bought failing laundromats, cheap commercial real estate, and ignored the judgment of his peers. He learned to fail cheaply, adapt rapidly, and build a tolerance for chaos. Julian is paralyzed by the fear of being wrong because academia punishes the incorrect answer with a failing grade. Marcus became wealthy precisely because he operates in the chaos of reality, where failing fast is the only way to capture market share. The university conditioned Julian to seek permission and validation from an authority figure, so logically he went out and found one. He found an employer. Look closely at the corporate elite. They are premium broke. They drive leased luxury sedans to parking garages they don't own, to sit in offices they don't own, optimizing algorithms for a brand they don't own. They wrap their chains in velvet. The diploma on the wall isn't a certificate of freedom. It is a receipt for the purchase of an invisible cage, a cage built on the premise that intellectual prestige will somehow shield them from economic gravity. Julian presents his findings. He uses words like synergy, macro headwinds, and optimization. Marcus listens silently, nods once, and approves the budget. Marcus doesn't need to be the smartest guy in the room. He just needs to buy the smartest guy in the room at a wholesale price and rent his brain out for a premium. Julian walks out of the boardroom feeling validated. He got the nod of approval. He gets to keep his job for another quarter. He gets to make his minimum loan payment for another month. He believes the system is fair because he is getting paid for his intelligence. But what Julian doesn't understand is the brutal calculus happening on the other side of that table, the invisible math that keeps the scholar running on the wheel until he dies, while the dropout buys his time for pennies on the dollar. The worst part about the academic trap isn't the financial debt. It's the psychological castration. You spent the first 25 years of your life sitting in perfectly aligned rows of desks, raising your hand and begging for permission to speak. You were trained by people who get paid a fixed salary to read from a standardized syllabus. They taught you that there is only one right answer, and if you deviate from the rubric, you fail. You were conditioned to be terrified of being wrong. And that is exactly why Marcus owns the company, and Julian works for him. The university system didn't sharpen Julian's mind. It sterilized it. It stripped away his primitive instinct for risk and replaced it with a desperate need for intellectual validation. When a problem arises, Julian convenes a committee. He builds a predictive model to ensure his fingerprints aren't on the murder weapon. He suffers from fatal paralysis by analysis. Meanwhile, Marcus just launches the product. If it breaks, he loses money, pivots the strategy, and tries again before Julian finishes printing his cover page. The university ecosystem is the most untouchable cartel in modern history. They don't sell education. They sell a socially acceptable form of intellectual obedience. They convince the brightest minds of our generation to take on crippling loans, not to build empires, but to become highly paid godines, premium corporate drones sitting in endless Santa Fe traffic, staring at the steering wheels of their leased luxury cars, completely dead inside. Here is the uncomfortable truth about the modern hierarchy. Your elite diploma isn't a weapon of mass disruption. It is a compliance certificate. It tells the wealthy that you are docile enough to sit in a cubicle for 12 hours a day, solving their complex problems, because you are too scared to face the chaos of the open market yourself. You are the smartest lab rat in the facility, generating millions for a guy who couldn't pass a freshman statistics exam. They keep you sedated with vanity titles. Senior Vice President of Operations. It sounds powerful, doesn't it? But titles are just cheap. Psychological cheese placed precisely on the mousetrap. They feed your ego so they can starve your bank account. You wear the suit and convince yourself you are climbing a ladder. But it's not a ladder. It's a treadmill. And someone else controls the speed. Phase 2. Paralysis by analysis. Look at the routine of the credentialed elite. You wake up exhausted to go to a job that demands every ounce of your cognitive bandwidth. You are consumed by the fear of making a visible mistake. In the corporate world, mistakes don't mean you learn. They mean you get replaced by a younger version of yourself, willing to take on more debt for the exact same illusion of prestige. The system relies on the fact that you are too emotionally invested in your perceived intelligence to ever walk away. You have to justify the student loans. You trade your unrecoverable life force for a direct deposit that gets instantly devoured by the lifestyle creep required to mask your misery. You are highly educated, and you are hopelessly trapped. Phase 3. The opportunity cost. Bloodbath. Let's do the math that the admissions office purposely leaves out of their glossy brochures. The brutal, unapologetic arithmetic of the academic trap. When Julian walked across that stage to receive his advanced degree, he didn't just walk away with a framed piece of paper. He walked away with $150,000 in non-dischargeable federal student loans. At a standard interest rate, if he takes 20 years to pay it off, he isn't paying $150,000. He's paying closer to $300,000. But the interest isn't the real tragedy. The real tragedy is the bloodbath of opportunity cost. While Julian spent the primate years of his cognitive life sitting in dimly lit lecture halls, arguing over theoretical frameworks that have never survived actual contact with the free market, Marcus was out in the dirt. Marcus was acquiring cheap, ugly cash-flowing assets. He bought a failing commercial cleaning route for $40,000. He made mistakes. He lost money on a bad lease. But his mistakes were cheap. They were real, and they taught him how to manipulate the financial environment. By the time Julian landed his first corporate job with a starting salary of $85,000, Marcus already had 8 years of compounded equity. Julian started his adult life at negative $150,000. Marcus started his 20s with zero, but by 28, he controlled $500,000 in physical assets. Julian is not just starting late. He is starting from the bottom of a financial crater, digging his way out with a plastic spoon made of theoretical knowledge. And he pays the highest possible tax rate on every single hour he sells, just to try and fill that hole. Here is a truth that the academic cartel will never admit. Society has weaponized the ego of the intellectual. They convinced an entire generation that going into massive debt to memorize dead men's theories makes you inherently superior. It doesn't make you superior. It makes you the perfect, predictable yield for a banking institution that monetizes your arrogance. You took out a 6-figure loan to buy the premium cheese, completely ignoring the heavy steel trap of compound interest snapping shut on your future. And how does the highly educated employee respond to this mathematical reality? With fierce, arrogant denial. Julian defends his choices by clinging to his prestige. He surrounds himself with other deeply in-debt intellectuals so they can validate each other's terrible financial decisions over $20 cocktails. He looks down on Marcus because Marcus doesn't know the difference between a qualitative and quantitative analysis paradigm. Marcus doesn't care. The market doesn't care about your expansive vocabulary. The market only respects leverage and ownership. Julian gets a 4% annual raise. Real inflation is running at 7%. He is mathematically moving backward while working harder every year. Julian sells his time, his most finite and decaying resource, at a fixed rate. Marcus simply buys Julian's time at wholesale, packages his intellectual labor into scalable corporate solutions, and sells it back to the open market at a massive markup. The PhD is nothing but a high-margin product sitting quietly in the dropout's inventory. The university system taught Julian how to avoid risk at all costs. But in the real economy, the person who completely avoids risk is the one who assumes the ultimate, fatal risk, the risk of depending entirely on someone else for survival. You think your degree is an impenetrable shield against the brutality of the economy, but it's just a heavier kind of collar. And every time the corporate board decides to downsize, every time the market shifts, you feel the cold reality of that collar tightening. Phase 4. The leverage hierarchy. The reason the man with no degree owns the company while the PhD works for him boils down to a single, unforgiving law of capitalism. The academic spent his life learning how to avoid risk, while the owner spent his life learning how to price it. Universities manufacture risk-averse employees. The open market rewards risk-tolerant owners. If you want to break out of this invisible structure, you have to assassinate your own ego. You have to stop wanting to be the smartest person in the room. Intelligence without leverage is just high-functioning servitude. Prestige is a luxury tax levied against the deeply insecure. It is a psychological fee you pay to society for the right to look successful while operating on the edge of personal bankruptcy. The moment you stop caring about how your intellect is perceived by strangers, you become incredibly dangerous to the machine. Look at how the real players operate. They don't care about their corporate title. They are invisible. They practice stealth wealth. While the senior vice president is bleeding out $1,500 a month to lease a German sedan just to impress the valet, the guy who owns the valet company is driving a scratched 7-year-old truck that he bought in cash. The academic needs the luxury car to validate his expensive education. The owner doesn't need to validate anything because his dividends speak for him. The true flex isn't a corner office with a glass desk. The true flex is waking up on a Tuesday morning, pouring a cup of cheap black coffee, and knowing that not a single human being on this earth can tell you what to do with your afternoon. Imagine standing at a neighborhood barbecue. You are next to a guy who just financed an $80,000 luxury SUV at 9% interest. He is bragging about the leather seats. He has an Ivy League degree and a mortgage he can barely afford. He looks at you wearing an unbranded T-shirt and driving a 5-year-old hatchback, and he feels a deep sense of superiority. He pities you. And you just smile and let him enjoy his illusion. You don't tell him that your investment portfolio generates his entire annual salary in passive dividends. You allow the deeply indebted to feel superior because their arrogance is the exact mechanism that keeps them trapped. You let the scholars laugh at your lack of pedigree while you silently buy the building they rent their apartments in. Phase 5. The ghost in the machine. The final step out of the trap is total financial silence. The system feeds on your desire to be seen. The credit card companies, the luxury brands, the prestigious universities, they all bait the mousetrap with the exact same cheese: social validation. When you stop eating the cheese, the trap loses all its power over you. You move through the economy extracting equity instead of paying interest. You don't argue with the intellectuals over theoretical economic policies. You simply observe the rules of the game, acquire ownership, and let the highly educated middle class fight over the scraps of a tiny corporate match. You are no longer the premium lab rat running on a diamond-encrusted wheel. You are the architect looking at the blueprint of the facility. You can keep polishing the brass on the Titanic while clutching your master's degree, or you can get in the lifeboat, row to shore, and start building your own fleet. If you made it this far, drop a comment saying, "Uncredentialed ghost." Everyone else will just think you're crazy. But we'll know you woke up. My name is Daniel Rath, and I'll see you outside the maze.